Welcome on into the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, and it is time for another mock draft weekday. And today, we're going to be looking at some of the how teams addressing many of their needs, for the most part, in free agency can impact the draft. And now we're getting a better picture, getting closer to, kind of taking best player available. But, each team's going to have a different best player available. So that's what we try to determine is what does each of these teams think is the best player. And so a lot of fun things going on in free agency. Originally, I taped a video where I just did like a wheel spin to randomize the draft, make it really different. But then it felt really weird to wait a full another week before really getting into what's happened with free agency, because by a week from now, free agency is going to be like old news. So next week, my big 2.0 mock draft will be dropping. I'm hoping maybe some more quarterback situations get a little bit more resolved, but they aren't as of right now on Tuesday midday. So we're going to deal with what we got to deal with. Things could happen while I'm recording, while I'm editing and getting this uploaded. But let's just get moving on with this mock draft to begin this video with. We're going to have a trade. So there are two things I believe that can happen with this number one pick. There are two teams that could take this pick, and that is either Tennessee or the New York Giants. The question is will the mass media campaign that Tennessee has been doing since day one, will it be enough to get the Giants to get scared to move up? And even if it's not enough to get the Giants scared, what kind of offer do they offer the Tennessee Titans? And is basically anything better than nothing? I don't know. I know that in my 2.0, I'm not going to go this route, so let's go this route with this draft. We're going to have a little bit of fun. We're going to have the Tennessee Titans, New York Giants making a trade. I don't know exactly what it's going to be. It doesn't really matter, so we will just swap those, and we'll move ahead with that. New York Giants on the clock. I think relatively low compensation compared to what the typical, getting up to the number one pick for a quarterback compensation might be, because the Tennessee Titans' hands are kind of tied too. They don't really want to move back, probably don't even want to move back all the way to 4, but I doubt Cleveland and I doubt New England are willing to move up, and you start to go a little bit further back, and I just don't think that Tennessee's interested in that at all. So both of these teams just have one trade partner for each other from what I can tell. And so the New York Giants just kind of secure that they get their guy. Let's start this draft. And we're going to have that guy, of course, being Cam Ward. More and more, look, they could be one of the teams who think that Shedeur Sanders is the number one quarterback in this draft. That wouldn't be 100% shock. And having a little bit of fun, that might have been a fun route to go with this. We'll explore that maybe a different day. But we're just going to have Cam Ward go at pick 1. Either of these quarterbacks, I think, make enough sense for the New York Giants, just different arguments as to which one, and ultimately, just which one do they actually prefer. And we can't know that until draft day, if they're in this position to take one of the two. Then we've got the Cleveland Browns up next, and we're going to get a little bit crazy here. So that was pretty normal. Also, I think most likely the New York Giants end up pairing that up with like Russell Wilson or Kirk Cousins. Seem to be the more likely options there to pair up with Cam Ward in New York. So Cleveland, like I said, we're going to get a little bit crazy. Travis Hunter, could be the guy, but they view him as a wide receiver first. Does that make much of a difference between cornerback first and their willingness to take him at pick 2? I don't know, but I do think that there's more chance that if they view him as a wide receiver first, that they view a different wide receiver ahead of him even. It is possible. So, tough to say. They just re-signed Myles Garrett, so like I said, we are going to get a little bit crazy. They have a need at running back, and there is a really, really good running back in this class. Ashton Jeanty going to go pick 2 to the Cleveland Browns. Like I said, we're having a little bit of fun here. Don't take this too seriously. Pick 3, we're going to go with Abdul Carter to the Tennessee Titans. And there's just not a whole lot to talk about there. Quite possibly I'd say the majority of opinions seem to say Abdul Carter, best player in this draft. It's close between him and Travis Hunter, but Abdul Carter definitely right up there, 1A, 1B in this class. And that's going to bring the New England Patriots up onto the clock. And we are going to have a trade. So I think, to me, New York Giants here at pick 3, New England Patriots, depending on exactly how they see things and this board falling and everything, are both candidates where if they want to move out here because Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter's available and a team's willing to come up and give them some day 1, or day 1, but day 2 capital on top of that to move up, I think you're willing to do that. And in this case, we're going to have New England being willing to do that. We're going to have, Las Vegas being the team to jump up. And the compensation is really important here. Jacksonville might be looking to move up, but probably not going to be able to get us as good of what we're kind of looking for in return for compensation. So something about this draft, my bad, it's going to be pick 68 here, and they're going to get 145 back in return. And if we do everything correctly here, for Las Vegas, we can probably get a 2026 sixth rounder on top of that. So this draft, once you get to pick 15, 20, from there on out to pick 50, 60, beyond, there's just not a whole lot of difference. And that's why I say this is going to be one of the least predictable drafts. Once we get towards the back end of the first round, expect surprises. Also, draft typical, positional value, you should probably just throw out the window in this draft and ignore what position it is guys are. More importantly, just how good are they, especially early on at the top 10, top 15 here, that counts. So just some things to think about with this draft. It's a unique draft in the sense that it really isn't highly talented at the top, but then it is quite deep once you get to that second, third tier, and then I think it falls off again. Once you get outside of the 5th round, I think you really see it kind of that depth disappear again, in my opinion, so far from what I've seen of the class. So anyways, Las Vegas now up on the clock. Obviously, they traded up for Travis Hunter in this situation, so I've got a cat falling off of my lap. And Jacksonville then up onto the clock. Free agency hasn't really changed the upside of adding a guy like Mason Graham to Jacksonville, so I know it's boring, but just nothing's really changed with this pick, and it's always been less so. This isn't the biggest need for Jacksonville. It's always been more so just about the upside of adding him to that front 7 and him being kind of best player available at this point in the draft. So that is what we're going to do. I do think trading back is something that I could have done, especially with San Francisco as a team that I look at to possibly move up for a guy like Mason Graham specifically. Talking about moving back and then picking Tedero McMillan, a quarterback, or even Omarion Hampton at pick 11. Some people are having him going top 15 now. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I also think that he has a small window of getting drafted before we'll see in this draft. He could slide, too, very easily. But New England moved back just a couple of picks ago, back up on the clock. They were able to get a little bit of capital in that, pick 68, moved 145 up to an area of the draft where we see a lot of that depth still quite probably remaining. And for New England, a lot of people are saying, buy a free agency, buy an offensive line in free agency, and then, go Tedero McMillan here or something crazy. And this wasn't the draft. I don't know that you can ever buy an entire free agent offensive line. You can get darn close in some free agency classes. Look, they added Morgan Moses, a 34-year-old mercenary at this point, so that's not a long-term solution either. And I also brought that up in one video where it's even if you were to be able to buy some sort of good offensive line, which you can't in this free agents class, it's not going to be one that you can trust for the long term, and so offensive line is always still going to be on the table here in the first round for New England as I think one of the better options for them to go. We'll see if they actually do it or not. But we trade back, we improve our capital in a sense in terms of the amount of players that we can draft, and we're going to take the best offensive lineman. I still think that that's Will Campbell. A lot of people think that Will Campbell, just in terms of best offensive lineman, not necessarily best tackle, agree Will Campbell is that guy. So the Jets in at pick 7. We could go Tedero McMillan. It would make enough sense. There are people who like him enough that it wouldn't be a shock here. Tyler Warren, it would make enough sense. People like him enough. I have him as a top 10 player in this class. We could go with an edge rusher. I think we'll get a little bit more into, some of the luster of some of the guys that we originally thought could go this high. Maybe it gets taken off a little bit. Some of them still very much in play here. It just depends what the teams think. We could go Jahdae Barron. This is a fit that I just really like for the New York Jets specifically up here. I think he's a super good fit for that Steve Wilkes system. I think I go more into that in my 2.0. I really haven't started my 2.0, so that could change. And I know that I need to explore Jahdae Barron falling in the draft. I just have such a hard time doing that because I have such a high opinion of him. And in this draft class, once again, I say we got to throw out our previous expectations, and maybe Jahdae Barron's one of those guys that we just see go higher in this draft than we anticipate that he would typically go in a normal draft. But I will say the New York Jets have patched up their secondary and free agency, but there is still room specifically for Jahdae Barron to be added into that secondary and help out year one and be worth, hopefully, taken in the top 10 here. Carolina, actually, before we get to the Carolina Panthers, I do want to say Armand Membu very well may be the route to go here. Offensive line would make a lot of sense for the Jets to go here as well with this pick. And probably the route that I go with the 2.0, but we'll see. That's also if he's available. I don't think there's a guarantee that Armand Membu's available at pick 7. So we'll see what happens with my 2.0. I've gone over so many different possible routes that this draft could go in. It's so hard to figure out, especially the quarterback situation. What's going on? Is Shedeur Sanders, is his stock falling? Is it still up here? I see both arguments. I think both are very valid, and we're gonna find out on draft day. I don't know that we're gonna know before then, and that's frustrating to some extent. Like last year, we just knew that those quarterbacks were going, but I don't know. So Carolina up on the board. Jalen Walker. I just talked about it. There are some concerns for the edge rushers that we normally put up there. I mean, look, he's really, really small to be an edge rusher only. And I don't think that he's an edge rusher only, and teams don't seem to think that he's an edge rusher only. And so then you put him into this kind of unspecified role, and then the question is, how much does the team think, how much value does the team put on that potential role? Chess piece role, it's unique. Unique is not always necessarily thought of as being better, though. So, then whatever else is available. So there's no guarantee that Jalen Walker's the guy here in Carolina's mind. We are looking at edge rushers here. Michael Williams. He lacks juice as a pass rusher, and I think that that's something that this Carolina unit probably is looking to add, is that juice. And then you got Shamar Stewart. And Shamar Stewart's just a physical, athletic freak. He is a disruptor. He's not a finisher at this point. Is that because of the Texas A&M system? Some say yes. The players say yes. Some don't necessarily prescribe by that. I don't know. It could be an excuse, could not be. I don't claim to have enough knowledge to sit there and watch the Texas A&M system and know what the coaches are asking of the players to confidently say that I agree or disagree with. I will say some of the sources that say that, I do put some weight to that argument for these guys, that the system just wasn't asking for them to have these huge production numbers, and so that's part of the reason. But I also think that we saw Shamar Stewart disrupt and not finish plenty as well. So a little bit of both. Regardless, at the end of the day, if you're a coach that thinks that you're worth being an NFL coach and you value your worth and you think that you can coach guys up, you take a guy like Shamar Stewart and you say, I can't coach any guy up more than I could coach Shamar Stewart, as in it's the ceiling argument. So in this case, we're going to have Carolina just going with that incredibly high ceiling that a guy like Shamar Stewart does provide. And you can't really argue with that. I don't value him this highly in the draft in terms of my top 50 or top 75, but you got to like him. New Orleans up on the clock next, and more, I believe that we see 2 offensive linemen go in the top 10 of this draft. And we're going to see that happen here. Armand Membu going to New Orleans at pick 9. Nothing too much to say about that. It's one of their needs. And Chicago comes up onto the board next. Let's see. 2 guards and a center. Still draft more offensive line. Yeah. So I talked about this in my previous longer video. You may or may not have seen that. But in the press conference at the Combine, head coach there in Chicago, Johnson, talked about how having a best 5 He really likes to have a best 6, 7, 8, 9. He went all the way to 10. He likes to have a really deep, good offensive line room. So in terms of the entirety of this draft, I still anticipate that the Chicago Bears will continue to add to that offensive line room, but they are not forced to try to take one here at pick 10 if they don't feel comfortable with one, for sure. In fact, this allows them to go and look in other avenues, and there is room for another receiver in this receiving group. However, we just saw in 2024, does that start to overcrowd the room? Does that then put a lot of pressure on the quarterback to get every guy, their flowers, to get them the ball into their hands enough for them to feel valued within this system? That's a lot. There's another route, though, that we could go to add a receiver to this room, not necessarily a wide receiver. I think you know where I'm going right now. 12 personnel is definitely a route that we see the NFL heading towards more comfortable with that. I think it's a route that could make a lot of sense for this team in terms of giving Caleb Williams more protection. And so for that reason, we're going to go with Tyler Warren over a Loveland as a possibility. Some people, some teams probably do like Colston Loveland, what he provides, more than Tyler Warren. I'm not of that ilk, but obviously all it takes is one. So we've eliminated that. We do still want the protection ability from our 2 tight ends when we're in our 12 personnel. This also will help to improve our run game, something that we know that this offensive staff values very highly. And they already have 1 tight end in there, 2 talented tight ends. Both of them offer the ability to block and go out and be a weapon in the receiving game. And so that adds a lot of ways that you can really get tricky with, make more formations out of these guys, move them around a little bit more, even though it's 2 tight ends. You can get out of, a typical 12 personnel having the 2 tight ends in line like that and move them out a little bit more too. So a lot of ways that you can have some fun and play around with this while also just improving that offense as a whole and helping Caleb Williams is ultimately goal number 1. And a good run game and good protection are going to go a long ways towards that. And I think it's pretty clear that that's what Chicago cares about at this point in rebuilding, retooling this Chicago offense. San Francisco up onto the clock next, and I can't stop doing this for San Francisco. This guy is smart. He knows ball, and he's one hell of a leader. And that's going to be Jihad Campbell, who I do have in my top 10 now. On my top 70, 80? I'm up to like a top 80 right now. So, by the way, if you like this video, please do drop a like. And if you want more content, more of my opinions, you can find all of that up on, a large part of that up on the Discord server. There's a link to that in the description. There's also a link to my website in the description. And you can find my top, like I said, I think it's about top 80. Big board is available as well up on the website. So go check those resources out. Ask any questions in the comments if you're having any trouble finding any of those resources, and I'll help direct you there. Hi, it's me from the future. I forgot to say earlier on in the video, so I'm just going to add this in here as you're listening to it, that also to keep an eye out for my top 10 offensive tackle rankings video that will be coming out in probably 2 days, maybe Thursday, maybe Wednesday. Dallas comes up onto the clock next, and I think Tedero McMillan, this is another team that he just really helps to settle everybody into, it's maybe a little bit different for Dallas. He's a really good complement to CeeDee Lamb in that wide receiver room. So I think that would be a lot of fun. And I do think that Dallas is going to at least be weighing that option here at pick 12. Maybe they would prefer somebody like Matthew Golden here. It's possible. I still think Tedero McMillan, CeeDee Lamb makes more sense than CeeDee Lamb, Matthew Golden. Let's bring us on to the Miami Dolphins here at pick 13. And I think that I'm going to explore Kelvin Banks Jr. falling further in my 2.0 mock draft. It's not something that I normally do. Normally I do have him going right around this area of the draft. Now they did add a guard to this room, which is maybe where they would want Kelvin Banks in the short term, but that's not something that's stopping me from drafting an offensive lineman. The talent that they added in free agency is just not relevant, really, more of a depth guy, more of a bit of an insurance piece in case the draft goes differently than what they're hoping for, and they just end up without somebody that they trust along the offensive line. Well, at least, hey, we got this guy, and hopefully that will work, type of addition to that offensive line. Indianapolis Colts here at pick 14. Michael Williams lacks juice, the upside. He's then to be opposite of the not-so-juicy Laiatu Latu. Mike Green, another option here at edge rusher. Ultra juicy, and he has more of a known role compared to Jalen Walker, who doesn't really necessarily have that role. Specific spot where you're going to put him in every single down and distance, whatever. But Jalen Walker is kind of the opposite of that. Very versatile, and he also comes with some juice himself. So what do we want to add to this room? And I ended up going with, I don't even remember, I ended up going with Jalen Walker. I was really between Mike Green and Jalen Walker, because I do think Michael Williams, opposite of Laiatu Latu, I think we're missing a little bit of juice in the room then. You know, this is another situation. If you like Michael Williams more than Jalen Walker, more than Mike Green, then go right ahead. I can't speak to what their evaluators personally think, but Jalen Walker would make a lot of sense here too. They do need some off-ball linebacker help too in Indianapolis, so he helps a little bit here, a little bit there. As long as they have a plan for Jalen Walker, makes plenty of sense, and you like it. Atlanta Falcons might be a little bit saddened by this. I am going to have Atlanta going safety here, and then the question becomes is which safety do they like more? And it's probably between two safeties, being Malachi Starks and Nick Emmanwori. So, you know, what's the difference between the two? Malachi Starks, he's a really smart, headsy kind of player, high IQ, chess piece type of upside for him, and he comes with some cat-like nimbleness, whereas Nick Emmanwori is just this athletic, physical freak with downhill tone-setting upside, and he has cheetah-like straight-line speed. I think that Jeff Ulbrich prefers the versatility of a guy like Malachi Starks more than the freak nature of Nick Emmanwori and what he adds. Arizona up on the clock next. This pick could go so many different ways for Arizona. They added Josh Sweat, edge rusher, during the draft. During free agency, they've also got Baron Browning there, Zaven Collins, and second-year player B.J. Ojulari, who missed last year due to injury, but should be back, and potentially an addition into this room too. So, less so a need here in the first round, where, you know, for a roster that has plenty of need, that's an area where we could probably push that off. Will Johnson, who I've mocked to Arizona here, makes a lot of sense. I don't really care to bring in a third, fourth round cornerback into this room. The only time that I really want, outside of, 6th, 7th round, to add a cornerback into this Arizona room is if it is one of these top two tiers of cornerbacks. That's to bring us on to the Bengals. And if there's one thing that's still true about the league is that you got to stop the run first before you can do anything else. And so that leads me to think that Michael Williams could be, if available here at pick 17, a really nice addition into this edge rush room. Let's take a look at it. You look at where his strength lies. He's an excellent elite type of run defender for an edge rusher. Still needs a little bit more juice, is something, he doesn't necessarily have, but he did play this entire year injured, banged up, and that did limit him physically. You can go back, look at his 2023 tape, and you will see that, he had more juice there. Still not the juiciest of guys, still would like more pass rush from him, but I think that we see the tools are there for that to develop. And then, once again, you stop the run first. So that's going to be that addition into this edge rusher room with Cincinnati, assuming that they're going to be losing some more pieces in that edge rusher room before all is over as well. Let's bring us on to the Seattle Seahawks here at pick 18. And they still need help along the interior of their offensive line. But, Gray Zabel could be an addition here. We know that they don't love going interior offensive line. Donovan Jackson, Tyler Booker, guys who I think go a little bit later, and it looks like are starting to be felt like, they might be going, at least at the back end of the first compared to this high up. We already know that Seattle doesn't love drafting interior offensive line. We know that this is an offensive system that doesn't necessarily put a high emphasis on offensive line because they can get away with more mediocre play just because the system makes life easier on their offensive line with Clint Kubiak coming into town. I do think it's also too early for the cornerbacks, much like it might be for the interior offensive linemen. Once again, especially for the Seattle Seahawks, there are other teams who I might take one of those offensive linemen for in some drafts and not feel like it's too early. But specifically for Seattle, I really think so. But like I brought up, Clint Kubiak coming in as their new offensive coordinator. That's a Kyle Shanahan type of offensive system that I was talking about. And, they like their good blocking wide receivers. They just lost DK Metcalf, so is wide receiver something? We know that Matthew Golden could be gone by now, could be going at any point in this draft. Well, I don't know that that's necessarily a fit here for what they want to do. Luther Burden and Emeka Egbuka, definitely willing receivers, could be additions here, but then we run into, is there too much overlap with what JSN can do, Jackson Smith and Jigba? Typically thought of as a slot receiver. Looks like they're probably going to be asking him to be their Z. Definitely going to be asking him to be their primary receiver for the time being. But either way, does that become to be a little bit too much overlap with these types of guys? I think maybe we would rather add a Jack Besh, an Eli Ioman, or a Jaden Higgins. Maybe a little bit too early for those types of guys here for Seattle at this point in the draft. Hopefully, at least one of them will be around in the second round. But, you know what we could add to this as a receiver, yet again, is going to be the tight end position. Colston Loveland. Tight ends, very important to the Kyle Shanahan system. I mean, we've seen that throughout several of the teams, offshoots of the Shanahan system, as well as most specifically, you think of how important George Kittle has been to the San Francisco offense. So I think Colston Loveland adds a nice receiving option here. Doesn't pinhole anybody into too much of a role here, and it could just be the piece that Seattle finds to be the most valuable at this point in the draft. When you look at some of the other types of needs, not quite matching, draft grade, I suppose, at this point for Seattle in too many areas. But Jihad Campbell, too, if he's available, could be something that Seattle would be very, very excited about here. But he's gone here. And Tampa Bay, another team who I think would love that. But not here available. I have Tampa Bay going Mike Green, edge rusher, still a very important need for them. Mike Green, one of those guys. Potential off-field baggage. I don't want to hold it off too much against him at this point unless we start seeing some of those guys who are connected to the NFL teams start to push him out of their first round or something like that. Then we say, okay, there's more concern here, probably internally with the NFL, that his stock truly is going to get pushed down. So for now, I think it's just like yellow flag instead of red flag kind of material for Mike Green. That's going to bring us on to the Denver Broncos. And really for me, what we got, the tight ends are gone, unfortunately. Would have loved to go one of those routes for them. Kenneth Grant is an option here. They have a need at nose tackle. Omarion Hampton, I think, is an option here. Definitely don't have to force running back to Denver. They have some options internally that they've invested in. And they could also be looking at wide receiver. So I whittled this down by thinking, there's been a focus on this defense in free agency. This was already a really good defensive unit last year. If we have one kind of area of some weakness as our nose tackle, we could probably get away with that maybe we can say no to taking Kenneth Grant. I also like Kenneth Grant here a lot. Just saying, that's going to be the logic here is it's a deep defensive line class anyways in this draft, so we can still get one later that we'll feel comfortable with, but we don't have to address it here. And it's also a deep running back class. We don't have to address that here. Wide receiver class, however, not so deep. There are some really good options here that specifically, I think, fit what we would want in order to help our young quarterback. And so the question is it Luther Burden? Is it Emeka Egbuka? Personally, I like Emeka Egbuka more, so that's just the route that we're going to go here. But some people like Luther Burden more. I think either one could be a nice fit here for Denver. Just very ever so slightly different arguments as to which one you might prefer more. Pittsburgh comes up on the clock, and if you don't recall, Shedeur Sanders is still available. Pittsburgh looking to potentially add Aaron Rodgers in free agency. That could be the case. You take a shot at your future. Aaron Rodgers is not your future. You know that. He's a 1-year probably answer here to help you out. And then depending on where Shedeur Sanders is at that point. We hopefully can play him in year 2, if not late year 1, if need be. That brings us on to pick 22 here, and they added Najee Harris, so I think there's less of a need of adding a running back in this class, but also I don't think that eliminates them from adding another running back, but probably not in the first round. Definitely not like trading up in the first round like I've done with them once or twice before. And in case you missed it in my previous video, I did talk about how Jim Harbaugh, I think, had a near slip of the tongue when talking about wanting to get potentially Kenneth Grant back together with the conditioning coach that he had in Michigan, who has now followed him to the Chargers. So, and that part of the reason I linked that is it would just make sense that Kenneth Grant wanting to get him back in there, because that's one of the slight issues with Kenneth Grant is just where is that conditioning and what is the ceiling with that, though, however, is the positive side to Kenneth Grant. So, I think if Kenneth Grant's available here, that very well is probably the pick. Maybe it's something they're even willing to trade up for. Green Bay Packers pick 23. This was a tough one. So I have a real surprise coming here for my 2.0 mock draft that I know that Green Bay Packers fans will say is very likely to happen. They always love it when you do this kind of pick in the first round, and they say, yeah, Green Bay Packers always take that type of player in the first round. So a fun surprise there coming next week in my 2.0 mock draft, which is my series mock draft, meaning I do have some belief that this could be the pick for the Green Bay Packers, something you haven't seen yet, something that this always happens to me, something that you might see by the time that we get to my 2.0 mock draft release next week. Also, a reason why I think we might want to avoid adding some players into this roster is something that's not really talked about, something that's not really mainstreamed, and I think that's for reasons because Green Bay has a reputation to uphold, but there are some attitude issues with this young Green Bay Packers defense specifically, and low-key, I think that, these are some issues that the team is probably very aware of, and they want to prevent from, this becoming like a Vikings yacht situation or something like that, a bunch of young single men with a lot of money. You want to keep this room from getting too immature, and so you think about adding guys like James Pierce, maybe Maxwell Harrison into that environment. Could be the tipping point of pushing this thing over the edge of a whole group of guys making some bad decisions there. I think is something that you got to watch out for in Green Bay, and I don't know how up they are on avoiding this, how on top of that situation they are. And a lot of this stems from some cheerleaders a couple of years ago. I think maybe it was in the playoffs when the Green Bay team was at its highest swagger, thinking that, the future is already here for us, and maybe we're going to be going on a Super Bowl run here, as that defense was starting to connect too, as well as the offense was for Green Bay. A lot of cheerleaders for a team, maybe a couple of teams, said that they've heard the most crude things that they've ever heard coming out of some of these young guys in that defense, and didn't really hear anything about this last year, so hopefully everything was nipped in the bud, but I do think that it's something that Green Bay Packers are probably aware of, on top of, hopefully for their sake, making sure that they don't get too much immaturity into that locker room, and that maybe, add in a couple of veteran pieces wouldn't hurt either. Regardless, in free agency, they added Aaron Banks, most likely guard offensive addition, and I think that the end result of the offensive line ends up looking something like this when at the end of the day. That's going to be left tackle Zach Tom, Aaron Banks in at left guard, probably left guard, Jacob Monk and Elgton Jenkins battling it for center. Could very well be the case, or maybe Elgin Jenkins will be right guard or left guard, and Sean Ryan's the odd man out. Could make a lot of sense, actually. Sean Ryan's probably the least performing. So Elgin Jenkins, Aaron Banks at guards, Jacob Monk, but then I don't know if Sean Ryan really has center flexibility there. And then you got Jordan Morgan, I think, out at right tackle. So Zach Tom, left to right here, Zach Tom, Aaron Banks, we're going to go with, I think, Jacob Monk. Good chance of currently being the leader in the clubhouse to be the starting center for the Green Bay Packers. Elgin Jenkins, other guard. Jordan Morgan, right tackle. And that leaves Rasheed Walker being an excellent swing tackle, or maybe he takes a job from Jordan Morgan. And then, of course, that means is Jordan Morgan maybe the best guard out of the bunch? That's always possible too. So maybe Jordan Morgan kicks in, and then you've got like, a real backlog of guards on the team if Jordan Morgan is not being considered a tackle in this situation. So does it make more sense to add Gray Zabel into that mess? I don't know, but Gray Zabel does have the center flexibility, whereas where is Jacob Monk? Do we actually trust that? It's a mess there right now. I mean, it's kind of a good mess, I guess, but it's also one that wasn't necessary to spend that kind of money to make this a mess. Does Aaron Banks really improve that interior offensive line that much more over like Sean Ryan or Elgin Jenkins did? I don't know. So, Jacob Monk is far from a sure thing. I'm sure the Green Bay Packers feel that as much as they may or may not like him. They seemed to like him quite a bit last year. Still not a sure thing. I think in offseason, some strength and conditioning for him as well probably goes a long ways. But the Green Bay Packers also are not shy to double down on positions. So I am, at the end of the day, going to go Gray Zabel here for the Green Bay Packers, thinking that they're thinking, center competition front and foremost here to go along with Jacob Monk. And then he's versatile and just brings more versatility, which they also very much like. But maybe one of the tackles would make more sense here. I wouldn't argue with you. I'm not going to argue with you. If you want to say that's stupid, there's way too much room, interior offensive line stuff going on, tackles where they should add, I'm not going to disagree with that necessarily. But I also do disagree with that a little bit, maybe-ish. Vikings up on the clock finally, and if we're sticking with the idea that Max Harrison's off-field issues are pushing him down the draft, which, by the way, was one of the reasons that I didn't have Green Bay going like Max Harrison, who I'm sure athletically, profile-wise, they would love to have on the team, but that's what I was bringing up. Some of those, I didn't really finish that. Some of those issues with, or did I finish that? I said, James Pierce, Max Harrison. I think I mentioned his name. Whatever the case, we're going to continue that trend, saying that the NFL truly is concerned about that. We're going to push him down the board. Then I think interior defensive line, best player available is kind of where we're at for Minnesota, and that very well might be Derek Harmon. Very good disruptor to add to that room for Minnesota. It's an old room. They have added some people in there, but I think there's still room to add a guy like Derek Harmon there. Especially when you look into the future with the age and money being spent there along that front seven for the Minnesota Vikings. Then we've got Houston Texans up onto the clock. Josh Connerly Jr. is going to be the way. So they have traded away Laramie Tunsil. And I found out while I was making this, they had also just recently traded away Kenyon Green within an hour and a half or two of this recording. I still think that it's a lot easier to find interior offensive linemen in this draft. There's a lot of, I think, good guard talent in this draft that will be available still. But tackle, not so much. I mean, it really, really, really thins out at tackles. So let's get one while we can in Josh Connerly here to Houston. Should be a fine system fit as well. Los Angeles Rams are up on the clock next, and if there is a team that could add a guy, just take a chance, basically, is all I've got going on here. And the question would be like, do they need to add to this edge rush room? They like Byron Young and all, but, I mean, is the third-year average Byron Young really going to prevent you from taking an edge rusher, especially one with this kind of immense upside, if you're willing to take the bet on him, character-wise? No, it's not going to stop you from doing that, so James Pierce it is to the Rams. Baltimore up onto the clock here at pick 27. And I don't think that you could ever go wrong with adding another weapon into this offense. Could be exactly what they need. I think more so, leaning towards like a slot receiver. But Matthew Golden can be that just fine. So maybe a little bit of overlap to some extent with, say, Flowers and Matt Golden. But I also think that you can move them both. They're kind of interchangeable, but without being too redundant, if that makes sense. So I like that addition here to this offense. Maybe they would prefer a Luther Burden or he's the only other one available right now. That's right. Emeka Egbuka's gone, but or an Emeka Egbuka, if he were to be available, very well could be the case, and I wouldn't argue with that. They're, I think, more true slot receivers, which definitely is where we have the biggest hole in terms of adding a weapon into this offense for Baltimore. Detroit Lions up on the clock, pick 28. They brought Marcus Davenport back, edge rusher, but they cut edge rusher Zadarius Smith. So I think there's still room to get younger there, look towards the future in the edge rusher room, and to me, I think that's going to be Donovan Ezaraku. This is about the area in the draft where I think he should be going. I know he's a little bit high here on this draft board, but I think is a little bit too high on this draft board, and will probably be lower by the time that we get to draft day. The Washington Commanders are up on the clock next. They probably would have been really happy to get Donovan Ezaraku. They also very well might be very happy to get Nick Scourton, somebody who doesn't really get talked about too much. I have a good grade on him. He's just not somebody that sticks out in my memory very much. I'm gonna, when I get to the edge rushers and watch them again, I'll get refreshed on that and figure out exactly how much I do or do not like him. But nonetheless, somebody who could be going at the very tail end of the first round, early second round is probably the most likely scenario. Buffalo Bills are up onto the clock next. And I would feel comfortable drafting Walter Nolan much earlier on than this in the draft. He's another guy with character concerns, however, which seem to be pushing him further back in these drafts with guys who are very connected to the NFL. So trying to stay true to that. I do believe his character concerns are at least on the more minimal side of things, more immaturity than anything, and hopefully not. I think Walter Nolan likes to play football, and he's not only in it for the money, which is a concern of mine for some other guys. So, I think that we're at least still, Walter Nolan's on the table here, late first round compared to some of these, I think James Pierce has bigger character concerns, but he also has a bigger upside than Walter Nolan, to some extent, at a more important position. True. Kansas City up on the clock here, pick 31. And look, we're going to give this man one job, and that job is to protect our quarterback. If you're not up to date, Kansas City has gotten rid of some of their offensive line pieces. And so now it's in a bit of a rebuild. I don't know how good of a rebuild it's been so far, but a guy like Tyler Booker, you can just put him in the center. I mean, look at this pass blocking, great, bigger-ish guy here, 325, 6'5". Just ask him to anchor in, keep that pocket safe for your quarterback. Could make a lot of sense. Also a very smart player, good leadership qualities, can never hurt. And so Kansas City, I think, now taking advantage of that hole by adding Tyler Booker. And they also did add a tackle who could be their left tackle along their offensive line in free agency as well. That's going to bring the Philadelphia Eagles up onto the board, and Luther Burden, I think, is a guy that I'm going to draft. So when it comes to adding Luther Burden to the Philadelphia Eagles, this has two reasons why I think that this is very much a possibility, more so now than I would have said a week ago. First of all, they traded for a Houston guard, Kenyon Green, so I no longer have them needing to add another guard into that room as high of a priority as it was previously. And second of all, they're dangling Dallas Goedert out on the trade market. And so if Dallas Goedert were to leave, they would need a threat over the middle of the field to, take up some of that. And that portion of this offense is a very important portion of the offense. And a guy like Luther Burden is exactly that. In fact, would probably be an upgrade over Dallas Goedert in terms of that specific role in the passing game. So I like this addition to Philadelphia quite a bit here with how things are shaping out. And that is going to be it for this draft. So you can pause, look at the entirety of the draft. Let me know how bad I did in the comments. Remember, this is for fun. My 2.0 mock draft, though, next week, that's one where you can really rip me a new one and let me know what I did wrong with. You can also let me know, though. I still want to know, why is a guy not a fit for your system? Why is that not a need for your team? Remember, best player available, more important. But as I talked about earlier, there's a whole lot of best player availables at this point once we get into the 20s or so of this draft. So let me know all those good things, and take care. Bye-bye.